Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. We're at episode number 1685 today. Thank you so much for joining me for it as always. Thank you so much for subscribing to the show wherever you happen to be catching it. Thank you so much for all of your support day in and day out, and thank you especially to the patrons who support this show at patreon.com/SW7x7 as well. And today we're going to do a quick Game of Thrones movies update because there's been a bit of new news that kind of reframes the way that we think about those movies. So first of all, let's talk about the timeline of things. And, we weren't necessarily sure when they were going to get going on these movies. We knew that it was going to be after Game of Thrones was actually done, but when that was, based on the last time that you and I talked about this, hadn't been set. Well, it has now, or it's been for a little bit because, there's not a heck of a lot of news to report on this thing, so we don't do the updates on that very often. I don't do the updates on that very often. But April 14th is going to be the premiere of the final season of Game of Thrones, and May 19th is the final episode of Game of Thrones. And so after that, that's when they're going to go start working on Star Wars. Now, here's the thing. Here's why it's particularly newsworthy. First of all, okay, so it's ending in May. So are they going to be at Star Wars Celebration? It's hard to imagine them being there. I mean, they didn't do a future filmmakers thing, as you and I have talked about on the show before. And so at least they didn't do it in Orlando. They did it in London and they did it in Anaheim, but they didn't do it in 2017 in Orlando. So it's kind of hard to see them doing it now, especially considering that, if they've had any time to work on anything, it's finishing up Game of Thrones. So it's unlikely that they really have anything worthwhile to share, unless it's about Game of Thrones or about being excited about working on Star Wars. So I don't think we're going to see him at Celebration necessarily. And same for Rian Johnson, for that matter. I don't think we're going to see him either because he's still working on Knives Out. So, if he's had time to, think about Star Wars stuff, it's probably only at the very basic level. And, even when they had the Future Filmmakers thing at Celebration Anaheim, they had a cobbled up teaser for Rogue One that they were able to share, and they didn't have that for Solo, but they had the actors, and so they were able to bring Alden Ehrenreich out, for example, and also had Lord and Miller there too. So there was enough pre-production happening where there was something that could be done, and it's not going to be the case with the Game of Thrones guys or with Rian Johnson for either of their sets of movies. So yeah, I don't think we're going to be seeing them at Celebration Chicago, unless they have a little more in store for us than we might expect. Now, regarding the movies that David Benioff and D.B. Weiss are going to be making for Lucasfilm, it had been previously reported that they are working on a quote-unquote series of movies for Lucasfilm. So that was in opposition to the fact that Rian Johnson was announced as working on a trilogy and would be writing and directing the first one in the trilogy. So, yeah, there's definitely a difference between between trilogy and series, for sure. But it seems like what the Game of Thrones guys may end up working on is, in fact, well, at the very least 3 movies, possibly a trilogy in its own right. So there was a story in TV Line, which, who knows anything about TV Line? No offense to TV Line, okay? It's the first time they've ever come across my radar, and they may be a fine publication, and I just don't, run in the same circles as they do. So no offense to TV Line whatsoever. Anyway, they ran a story about the development of the HBO series Confederate that Benioff and Weiss are supposed to be working on, or were working on at some point. And the story on TV Line was an interview with HBO's network president, Casey Bloys, Bloys, so here we go with pronunciation on the show, saying that the reason why Confederate has been delayed is not about controversy over the show, which is a subject, for its own show, but because of the fact that Benioff and Weiss were hired by Lucasfilm to do Star Wars movies. And so the situation is that they're going to finish Game of Thrones, and then they're going to do their Star Wars movies, and then in theory they're going to come back and do Confederate for HBO. Now, the thing that is particularly relevant for it is that the story says that they are working on a trilogy, but it's not, it's not a quote that's actually attributed to anyone in specific. But the quote that actually comes out of Casey Bloys' mouth is that it's 3 movies. Specifically, when addressing the Confederate delay, he says that it's not about the controversy. The delay was that they were offered 3 movies, unquote. So 3 movies isn't necessarily a trilogy per se. It certainly has the opportunity to present itself as a trilogy, but I mean, think of, James Bond movies, for example. Like, if Sam Mendes did 3 James Bond movies, is it a trilogy necessarily? Or did he just do, 3 James Bond movies? Maybe it's a situation where the Game of Thrones guys are going to invent something that could become a series, but they're only working on the first 3 movies in the series, whatever that series may be. And so obviously you can see that there's, a lot of different ways that you can slice this particular bit of news, but the core of it is that we're hearing from HBO's network president specifically that Benioff and Weiss were offered 3 movies for Lucasfilm, and that's what they're going to be working on once Game of Thrones is done. And that is just about everything to cover, except for one quick note about Valentine's Day tomorrow, and I'll do that in just a moment. Before I do, though, of course, this is the part where I ask you to subscribe if you're not already, if you're enjoying this daily dose of Star Wars joy. And if you're really enjoying it and think it's worth putting a little something in the tip jar, then you can find that metaphorical tip jar at patreon.com/SW7X7. So, it being Valentine's Day tomorrow, I have looked in my Libsyn statistics. Those are the audio podcasting statistics. And interestingly enough, San Francisco is one of the highest cities for downloads for the show. And it doesn't escape my notice that Lucasfilm is actually based in San Francisco. This is correlation, not necessarily actual fact. But if anyone at Lucasfilm is listening, Valentine's Day would be a great way to show that you love Star Wars fans by giving us the title of Episode 9. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We'll get it someday, and we'll be perfectly happy whenever we get it. But, little guilt trip there for you. And also Los Angeles is pretty high on the radar, and there are also a significant number of folks working for Lucasfilm down in the LA area too. So hey, Lucasfilm, if you're listening, great time for it. And Pablo Hidalgo says that he doesn't even know the title of it. And it's shocking to believe that is a possibility, but I suppose it's a possibility. But yeah, I would be really shocked if that were actually the case. But be that as it may, we're going to call it an episode for now. So thank you so much for joining me for it again, as always. And also, as always, may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.